Good afternoon, everyone, and we will start the August 23rd meeting for the 1950C Home and Community-Based Services Waiver Redesign Task Force. And at this time, if we could do the roll call. Please note if you're in person or remote.
Senator Carroll. Okay. Senator Meredith.
Present live and in person.
Senator Parrott. I think we may be muted.
Senator Parrott, if you could unmute yourself so you can respond to the roll.
Okay. Representative Elliott. Representative Kirk McCormick. Representative Stevenson. Senator Adams. Thank you. Representative Riley.
Here in the room.
Okay.
If we could at this time have a motion to approve the minutes of the July 26, 2021 meeting.
So moved.
We got a motion by Senator Meredith and a second by Senator Adams. All in favor say aye. Aye. And the motion passes. So at this time, we will start on the first item on the agenda, the importance of waiver services and barriers to care. And we will have with us Aaron Bale, who is a recipient of the Waiver Service Program, the Long-Term Care Waiver Service Program, and also Linda Clowitter, who is a speech-language pathologist and owner of Brave Wave Neural Rehab. If you guys are ready, we'll be more than glad to have you, Aaron and Linda.
Hello, I'm Linda Clowitter. Thank you for having me. I'm a speech-language pathologist, and I have been for 30 years. I started my own company, Brainwave Neuro Rehab, in 2019 after working for several local brain injury companies for 15 years. I am involved in various volunteer activities related to brain injury, and currently I co-facilitate an online survivor support group. I would like to introduce one of my clients, Aaron Bale. He is going to tell you a bit about himself.
Thank you, Linda. My name is Aaron Bale. I am 38 years old. I was born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky. I graduated from St. Xavier High School and attended University of Louisville for 2 years until a 76 Buick came crashing into my body, my head, and my life. I was just 19. I was at a stoplight when I was hit from behind, hard. It looked like I escaped without a scratch, but within 6 months, I had lost everything for reasons I couldn't fully understand. I lost my job, my insurance, my home. I lost my girlfriend, my school, my fraternity, and most critically, I lost my health. I was in a living hell. I was unable to think straight. My doctors and I knew something was going on, but didn't know what. After eventually getting Medicaid, I was referred to Frazier Neuro Rehab, where we finally made the connection between the accident and my physical pain, emotional grief, and mental confusion. The last of which was probably the worst. I had a traumatic brain injury. It would be 17 years later, after the accident, until I would receive services on the brain injury waiver, and it has been an absolute lifeline.
The co-chairs have asked us to speak to the importance of waiver services, any barriers to services we have experienced, and any thoughts on how they can improve services to access the services. First, we want to say that we are grateful that Kentucky has these ABI waivers, and we want to thank the committee for taking the initiative to improve them.
For the question about importance of the ABI waivers, I immediately chose the word lifeline. Life both in the literal sense of suicide, violence, homelessness, abuse, incarceration, obesity, heart disease, etc., but also in the sense that without services, I would not be able to have any life worth living.
I know that oftentimes people speak of the expense of the care for individuals after brain injury. Statistics show that care under the ABI waivers is less expensive than living in a nursing home. which is not the place to rehabilitate these individuals to increase their independence. We must remember that we are talking about, sorry, I lost my place. So sorry. We are talking about our most vulnerable population. They are people, not dollars in an expense report. Rehabilitation is the key to improving their future.
Not only are nursing homes expensive, but it is oppressing to be reminded every day that you are incapable of living alone like an adult. I believe I speak with many, maybe most people with a brain injury when I say that we are aware that we are a huge burden on society. We realize that literally millions of dollars are spent every year on us. We are sorry that our disease is so difficult, confusing, violent, and sometimes seemingly hopeless. We know you do not blame us because we did not ask for it, but it is important that you understand that we want to take responsibility.
We are going to address some barriers to the waiver. The first one is waiting lists to get services. The waiting list times for the waiver fluctuate, but something needs to be changed. Therapy shortly after the brain injury allows recovery to occur more quickly and without maladaptive behaviors being ingrained as neuroplasticity is occurring.
Yeah, my application to the waiver was filled out and it took over 2 years for me to get the services that I so desperately needed. This was after it took almost a decade, most of a decade, to even get an accurate EBI diagnosis. During that time, waiting, I was shunned by friends because they could sense that something was happening to me. Since I felt that they didn't want to be around me, I began to search for activities that I could do alone. I felt like I was in solitary confinement. I felt like I was broken off from society. I still feel that way a lot of the time. If I had gotten help earlier, I would not have felt the need to change for the worse. I am still working to undo all of that, and it is very challenging and time consuming. I've often told Linda and my other therapists that I am not even sure that I am making progress because it feels so slow. They have to remind me of specifics in order to convince me.
Another one of the barriers is reimbursement to providers, which affects freedom of choice for the clients. In 2019, providers were invited to an online waiver redesign PowerPoint presentation done by Navigant, in which they were proposing a cookie cutter design, making all 1915C waivers the same. The reimbursement rates have never increased since 1998 when the waivers were implemented. So we providers were excited that we would finally see an increase. The cost of everything to run a business has continued to increase. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that the buying power of $1 in 1998 would be $1.69 today. I remember vividly when Navigant showed the slides for proposed reimbursement rates. My jaw hit the floor and I had a sick feeling in my stomach. Some of the many cuts they had proposed included a 24% cut for ADT, a 20% cut for case management, and a 32% cut for speech language pathologists. What? Once I was able to process what I had just heard, I was extremely concerned about companies not being able to sustain, especially the smaller companies. There were a couple of follow-up meetings in Frankfurt with providers and some of the Navigant team. During those meetings, it was revealed that Navigant's methodology was flawed and that they didn't take into account several important factors when determining the changes in reimbursement. Too much to get into during this meeting. My point is that if reimbursement does not increase, companies will be forced out of business. Many companies are struggling to find staff. Just a couple of weeks ago, during a client's IDT meeting, the sister, who's the primary caregiver, voiced concern over my client only getting 4 hours per week of CLS. She and her husband are feeling intense caregiver burnout. There were 2 companies in the meeting who provide CLS services. Both stated that they cannot find staff. They are unable to compete with the rate of pay and incentives that companies like Amazon, Target, and Walmart are offering. The caregiver asked if there was a way that she could use her own money to supplement the pay that the companies provide their employees because she was so desperate for help. This family does not know what they are going to do to care for this client, who has already been in 2 residential facilities where things didn't go well due to the client's behavioral issues. It was heartbreaking not to have any solutions for her. Lack of providers will decrease the client's freedom of choice or their abilities to get services at all.
After I first started on the waiver, I had been having a consistent problem with one of my workers. Later, I was told that she, quote, made up her mind about me. And I never really understood exactly what that meant, but I do know that I was given another worker who has been absolutely great. And I'm grateful to have had the option, or as you guys call it, freedom of choice. Also, I just recently lost my CLS. And while I am on the waiting list for another one, my case manager has informed me that she has several clients who have been waiting years. I will be extra honest right here. My instrumental ADLs tanked immediately without CLS. My home was a complete wreck. I barely even made it to this meeting. It seems to me that the more resources you invest in staff and the less of a general burden means the less of general burden that I will end up being on society in the end. Please help me keep my burden as light as possible.
Communication is another area in which I hear so much confusion from clients or their family members. Many people don't even know that there are ABI waivers. Several individuals have told me that the process to get on the waiver was challenging for them to comprehend, and the correspondence from the Department of Medicaid is confusing. Recently, a survivor in my support group received a letter from DMS. Her interpretation of the letter was her interpretation of the letter, which was regarding level of care determination, was that she was going to lose her waiver slot. She was beside herself. She didn't know what she was going to do. It actually was a letter requesting the usual documents that case managers file at the time of recertification. I encouraged her to contact her case manager, who was then able to explain that she was not going to lose her waiver. But as I said before that, she was running around in panic mode, not knowing what she would do.
This is the barrier that caused the most of my delay services over the past 20 years. Every time I got a letter from Medicaid or waiver services, I would skim it until I became too confused to really parse the important part. Then I have to send the picture to one of my workers to skim and tell me if anything urgent or actionable needs to be done before our next scheduled meeting. Otherwise, we just wait and then process it later. The letters might as well be written in Chinese.
The 52-unit monthly cap is another barrier to services. Typically, clients are scheduled on a recurring schedule. Routine is less stressful and causes less memory issues and confusion about when therapy will occur. Most people function when they know what to expect day to day and week to week. The problem occurs when the month is ending and Aaron, who is normally seen on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, does not have enough units left. This is disruptive to his plan of care. How many people who work full-time have to look at a calendar and say, oh, there are 5 Tuesdays this month. I guess I won't be working a full day on the 30th, or I guess if schedules allow, I can work a 12-hour day on Thursday to make up the missed sessions when a new month begins. How is this meeting the needs of the individual and not the needs of the regulations? It is definitely not person-centered. In my opinion, changing the 52 unit per month cap to 312 units for a 6-month period allows for flexibility and better meets the client's person-centered goals while maintaining the same budget.
Yeah, in addition to the confusion and disruption, for me, it was also a trust issue. I still don't really understand why I can't have 52 weeks of Tuesdays and Wednesdays of therapy a year without the cancellations seem arbitrary. And how can I trust you with my rehabilitation if I can't trust you to provide consistent schedules?
Transportation is another area that I've heard numerous complaints about over the years. It is another cause for increased stress for ABI clients. They at times arrive late to their ADT programs, causing them to miss their therapy session. They often are forced to ride on the bus for longer than they should. This is fatiguing. It causes them to not function at their optimal level.
The most accurate description I've found to give people is that the lack of transportation, at least in America, is really like having a third disability. I once waited 6 hours for FTSB after a day at neuro rehab. It is a constant oppressive disruption to my rehabilitation.
On a positive note, telehealth has been a godsend. While not every person with a brain injury is a candidate for telehealth, I have seen much progress with the ones who I treat who are. Some have commented that it has relieved the stress of transportation issues. I had one client who had to be put on hold for in-person sessions in February of 2020 due to having bed bugs. The problem with him being placed on hold at that time is that he was abandoned essentially by his team when he needed us the most. In March, when telehealth was approved due to COVID, the client was able to be seen again, and weekly guidance for bed bug remediation was able to occur. It took a long time to be deemed bug free. I cannot imagine what would have happened to this individual if telehealth was not an option.
I had a lot of initial skepticism about whether telehealth would even really be that helpful in a therapeutic sense. While the quarantines have been stressful in general, telehealth has been the best silver lining. With the improved efficiency of telehealth compared to waiting for FPSB, for example, I was able to put in the extra number of weekly therapy hours over the past 2 years that enabled me to sit here today with you and to say these words.
I have a couple of other suggestions for changes that would make the ABI waivers better that I don't have time to thoroughly discuss. One is to add physical therapy to the acute waiver, and the other is to allow behavioral therapists to work directly with the clients and not just set up a behavior plan and analyze data. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our concerns and suggestions. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need more information. We appreciate your willingness to improve these ABI waivers, making them person-centered and bettering the lives of these vulnerable individuals.
I would love to follow up with anyone about some ideas on earlier diagnosis and intervention. In the end, I ask that you please do not abandon the work that you are doing. Your work is the only thing that will help my people progress to the point where someone like me can communicate with you in any way that you can understand. Also, I would love to help problem solve if anyone thinks it would be beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Linda. Do we have any questions of any of the committee members? Senator Adams?
I just want to make one comment to Linda. Hi, thank you so much for presenting. Linda is a constituent and a friend, and she is always the first one to email me and call me and say, you need to look at this. You need to look at this. So I just want to say thank you for your advocacy, because the people that you care for and care about are better off because of your advocacy on this level. So thank you for all that you do. And Aaron, I just want to say, go Tigers.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions of any of the committee members, either in person or remote? Again, Linda, thank you for what you do. Aaron, continued success with your improvements, and hope things go well for both of you. Thank you very much for presenting today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, we will have Pam Smith, the Director of Community Alternatives from the Department of Medicaid Services, speak on 1915C waiver redesign options. So, Pam, are you with us?
I am here. Let me,
okay.
If I can get the screen up here.
Thank you. And go ahead when you're ready.
Can you let me know, are you all able to see the presentation?
Right now, we just, yeah, now we do.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you again for having us. Thank you, Aaron and Linda, for your all's testimony. So this part of the presentation that I'm going to be doing now is talking basically about the redesign. I know that later in the agenda we're going to talk about wait lists. We do mention it in this presentation at some point. So let me see if I've got too many screens and too many windows. So first, I wanted to talk about what the process is for updating a waiver, because it seems easy. You know, you need to make a change, so let's make a change. So just to kind of give you the workflow of how a waiver gets updated and how the changes are able to be enacted. So once all of the decision making and the planning is done and the changes are determined, then the application itself is either updated or completely rewritten, depending on the amount of changes. CMS requires there be a minimum of a 30-day public comment period. And during that 30 days, we are actively reviewing. So DMS and the sister agencies are actively reviewing any comments we receive. And at the end of that 30-day period, we actually will issue a response to those public comments. It could be that as a result of one of the public comments, there's a significant change made. If that's the case, it does have to go back out for public comment, but many times it can be addressed just in the response to the public comments. We typically, in addition to publishing what those are, will have at least one virtual session that we record where individuals can come and ask questions and we can discuss it. In addition to the waiver application itself being having to be updated to be resubmitted to CMS, the corresponding regulations also have to be submitted. So once we submit that waiver application, CMS has a 90-day window to review the application. However, at any point in time during that period, they can send it back to the state with a formal request for additional information or an RAI. At that point, it stops their 90-day review clock, and that will not begin again until we submit any changes. Kind of at the same time that we're working on the actual application changes, we're also working on the Kentucky Administrative Regulation changes. Those will be made. And until that works its way through that process, whether it be going through the emergency process or whether it be as an ordinary regulation and the full public comment period applying there as well, then the waiver changes cannot take effect until both of those have been, the regulation is in place and the waiver application has been approved by CMS. So I realize that is a little bit frustrating, the amount of time it takes to make a change, but just wanted to give you all kind of some insight into the administrative side of the waivers and what it does take to make a change to the waivers. Priority actions that we want to look at for making changes to the waiver. A lot of these go along with our enhanced FMAP plan that we submitted to CMS that we're waiting on receiving feedback from. One thing that we know has to be done is looking at the provider reimbursement rates. And I recently was in our consumer technical advisory committee, and I wanted to share something that one of the participants shared with us during that committee, because I believe it really speaks to why, you know, we talk about the, you know, competing with the Amazons and the Targets and the Starbucks, but to me, his statement was very impactful. This is what Mr. Campbell had said to us, that all across the Commonwealth of Kentucky, in practically every county, city, and town, the majority of garbage or sanitation companies pay their employees between $17 to $32 an hour with benefits to collect garbage from homes and pick up dung out of the streets. And if society in general and Kentuckians in particular are willing to pay someone from $17 to $32 an hour to literally pick up dung out of the streets, but the people's government and its system are not willing to pay over $11.50 an hour to persons who assist the elderly and people with disabilities to stay in their homes and apartments and live a satisfying and productive life, what does that say about us? So I thought that was a very poignant analogy, that we will pay more for sanitation workers than we do to take care of individuals and help them with some of the most intimate aspects of their lives. So provider rates is on top of the list. A new waitlist management policies. And I'll get in more to waitlist in the second presentation, but we do still have waitlists for 2 of our waivers. Looking at our independent and universal assessment tools, what that will do is allow us to ensure that individuals are receiving the right types of services and in the right amount. We also want to strengthen our participant-directed options, operations, and its design overall. We have seen, in particular with COVID, a strong increase in participant-directed services. We have, it's over 60% now of the individuals across the 5 waivers that offer PDS do participant direct at least one service. As we lose more and more workers from providers, we will see even more individuals go into that option. Looking at individual budgeting. So this looks at what the individual needs based on that universal assessment. So it is truly person-centeredness and truly looking at what services they need to best support them. And then lastly, to evaluate for new waivers or reconfigure our current waivers. I want to talk now just a little bit about the rate study that had been done prior, and then to give you some news that actually just came out of a meeting this morning. So in November of 18 through September of 19, DMS conducted a study of all of our 1915C waiver rates. The purpose of this study was to identify rates in need of adjustment, make rates consistent for similar services across waivers, and develop a sound rate setting methodology for waivers. The rate methodology and proposed rate adjustments were developed by taking into consideration the following. There was an input from a rate study work group comprised of CHFS staff, provider agency and association representatives, participants, and advocates. Looking at state-specific Bureau of Labor Statistics wage data, Bureau of Labor Statistics employment benefits data, economic data from the Kentucky Center for Statistics, and state-specific data from Medical Expenditure Panel survey. This slide basically goes through what was used as the determination for the rate methodology that ultimately allowed Guidehouse to recommend the rates. I again will highlight that at the point in time we were doing the rate study, we were limited by the fact that the direction of the cabinet leaders at that time was for that to be done in a budget neutral fashion. However, they did look at the direct care of cost, so looking at wages, benefits, non-billable time, and supervisory direct care costs. So again, wages, benefits, non-billable time. They looked at the non-direct care cost support. So the program support cost, administrative overhead, occupancy, transportation, equipment, supplies, facility cost, all of which vary based on the service and who was providing the service, the size of the organization. And that was determined, used to determine the actual rate. At this point, you can see this is just a comparison of where we were as far as what the rates were, which is this kind of darker gray, and what they would have been at that point in time based on the remaining budget neutral. However, let me go back to this one. We had a meeting just actually a couple hours ago within the cabinet because we understood the importance of helping our providers, the importance of raising the rates, the importance of the care that these individuals provide. And we are looking at what the cost will be to bring rates up as a first step to maybe an equal footing where services are the same, so that we don't have the wide disparity that if you're in one waiver for the same exact service, you get paid $4 a unit versus in another waiver, you get paid $2.75 a unit for the exact same service. So that will be step one. And that will be outside of the looking at them being budget neutral. Our next steps, we are going to look at looking at the rate study again, collecting more information, and moving forward with what exactly do we need to do with the services. Is there differences in the service menu that needs to happen? What differences there needs to be in the rates? Are there services that could be provided in the state plan that would free up some of the waiver dollars? Are there places, for example, transportation? Mr. Bale talked about transportation. We've had other individuals in the waivers talking about difficulties with transportation. Is that something that we need to look at more deeply in the waiver programs, how we can meet that need? And then, so The wait, I'm going to speak just a little bit to this because again, we have a complete wait list presentation. But as of actually when we did this slide, it's changed just a little bit since that day. Our Michelle P. waiver is up to 7,583 individuals. The time elapsed since application processing date and prior to allocation is 6 years. And that's where we have maintained our average amount of time, or our time between being placed on the wait list and the individual receiving an allocation. Supports for community living is the other waiver that we have a wait list in. So we have total of 119 on the urgent list and 2,814 on future planning. Most of these individuals, over 90%, are getting services in another waiver at this point in time. And if you look at the rate that we're adding to the wait list, we are adding an average of 78 individuals to Michelle P. each month, and SCL an average of 30 individuals a month. So waitlist cost, what are we going to do to, as I mentioned in an earlier slide, one of the things that we want to do to look at the wait list is how we handle them right now. Honestly, they are done differently, and I'll go into that in just a little bit. But we need to look at current utilization. Individuals who are underutilizing waiver or could be better served by state plan only. For example, we may have some individuals that are only using the waiver for some case management services, and you might have someone on the wait list that may need case management and personal assistance, or case management and multiple other services. And then again, the rate study is going to be the big component of that. So you all have been asking me how can the General Assembly help? Funding, again, I think that's no secret. I've asked for money, I think, every time I've come before you all shamelessly. But the truth is, additional money is needed to improve our programs for the current participants and to expand the availability to all of those individuals in need of support. Holistic consideration of HCBS. So certain populations have stronger advocacy networks than others. However, all of our waivers are in need of updates and improvements. And I think you all would agree that all of the individuals we serve on those waivers, or that potentially will serve in the future, deserve the same amount of consideration as any other population. Then this is a very important one, is public support for HCBS updates. We realize change is difficult. Whether it's positive change or it is what is perceived as negative change, change is just difficult across the board. So we anticipate pushback from stakeholders regarding updates, and we need support to move these forward. Again, the rate setting and participant directed services policies will be, I expect, hot button topics. And so we just need the support from the General Assembly to help the individuals to understand why these changes are needed and the value that they will bring.
Okay, thank you, Pam. If we have any questions, first of all, Senator Parrott, I think, has a question online. Senator Parrott, if you could click your unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to keep my comments short. I think the speaker's comments on the garbage collectors and the waiver payments should not be lost on any one of us. I think that was, that's a great correlation right there about those wages, and so that's on us.
Thank you, Senator Parrott. Senator Meredith.
Thank you, sir, and appreciate the presentation. A couple of questions, if I may. What's your timetable for doing the rate methodology study? When will we get the results of that?
So there'll be two steps to that. First step will be, and that we're taking immediate action on, is moving forward at looking at making an interim adjustment to the rates. So that I'll look for action to start happening within the next 30 days. They, of course, though, because it's in the regulation and it's in the waiver amendment, it will have to go through those steps that I mentioned earlier. We hope that because this is such an immediate need that, and CMS is aware of that, that we can make them, help them to go through a little bit faster. The larger rate study component, I do not have a time frame on. We have made it a priority, though, and we'll be moving forward as quickly as we can. However, we want to make sure that it is done correctly and that we have all of the input from all the necessary parties.
But just so I understand the process, when you talk about pushback from change, I certainly can appreciate that. Kind of built a whole career around it. But do you think part of the change is coming because they're going to be, for want of a better term, winners and losers with this rate methodology review?
So the previous rate study, there absolutely were, to use the quote, winners and losers, because within a budget neutral format, you only had so much money to work for. So you had to take from some to give to others. Our interim step, I do not see anybody really as a loser, because the idea would be to bring individuals up to a consistent rate across the board, based on the same services. Now, whether people perceive that as, they feel like they should have received more money, or they believe their services are more important, or their population is more difficult to serve, I can't say for sure. We might. I would hope not. I would hope that individuals see it as at least a positive step forward.
I would as well, but I can certainly understand the pressures. And do you really think there's anyone out there that's the rates are too high? I mean, because you're talking about a redistribution of funds, trying to make this budget neutral. Do you really know of anybody that's rate is too high?
So the budget neutral component was prior to, so that was previous direction. So the current cabinet leadership are not looking at it specifically in that budget neutral and just moving the funds around and the same amount of funds around. They're looking at what do we need to do to make this right, not necessarily in a budget neutral view.
Well, I can truly support that this should not be budget neutral. I think you built a good case, not just this session, but previous sessions as well, for additional funding. Wish I could give it to you yesterday, but political reality makes it a little bit difficult. But, I've always had the opinion that we spend enough money already in the healthcare delivery system in the United States to take care of everybody's needs if we just spend it the appropriate way. And I think what we fail to recognize is the cost of doing nothing. And this may sound like a rhetorical question, but with a 6-year wait list, what's the cost associated with that? Has anyone ever done a study to determine that? Because that is a real cost.
So there has not been a full study on the wait list. That is something, though, that we will have to conduct, and that we're looking at as we look at ways to eliminate that wait list. Because we realize that if someone signs up for a wait list, they need services of some type. What I expect to have happen based on just the trends of as we allocate individuals, there's about 30 to 40% that do not even respond, or we cannot find them at the time of the allocation. So we need to look at what drove them to sign up in the first place. Of course, there could be some that moved out of state, or that, just, or got services on a different waiver, and that's meeting their needs. But a lot of them, we're finding, in particular with Michelle P., is they just signed up because somebody told them, oh, you need to sign up for this. So I think we really need to look at that, because there are some individuals we know, about 90% of the people on the Michelle P. waiting list are already eligible for Medicaid. And so in particular, when you look at the children with EPSDT, their needs should be able to be met outside of the waiver. So I believe we're going to have to do a deep dive into that and really look at the individuals that are on that waiting list to be able to solve the problem of having a waiting list that's over 7,000 people long.
Well, again, I didn't mean it as a rhetorical question, but what's the cost of doing nothing? Certainly, with these programs, we want to improve the quality of life of everyone who's seeking these services. And also get them back to their full potential. But what's the cost to society for not addressing this? There is a cost there. And I think that's where the reallocation of funds could come from. That would not take care of all the needs totally, but I think we really have to take a look at that and question ourselves as what's it cost us by not filling these slots, regardless of whether they're legitimate waiting list or not. So I know that's a tough question and don't mean for it to be, but I think that's also always something that's going to be looked at is what's the cost of doing nothing. But I appreciate you wouldn't have an answer today, but would appreciate if you get some thought to that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Meredith. Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Pam, for your testimony. And I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. It sounds like that the rate study is going to include rate increases for all the waivers, or just not just one waiver. It's going to include increases for all of them. Is that what you're asking for?
So yes, the interim step is that we are going to look at what it would take to raise all of the waivers up to what to a certain point. So whether it be the highest rate for that service, but to at least everybody is going to, there would be an increase. So that would be an interim step while a larger rate study is being done that will look at not only kind of the things that I had highlighted on that one slide about, the actual direct cost of and indirect cost of providing services, but also looking at the service menu altogether and to see, do we have some services that aren't being utilized at all, and maybe we don't want to offer that and we want to, shift money that would be allocated to those into a different service. But so that would be a second step. But the first step would be looking at how do we bring everyone up to where they're at least at a compatible rate for providing the same services regardless of the population they serve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Adams. Pam, I'd like to ask a couple of questions, and they're related to this in some ways, and in some ways are a little different. Is Kentucky's Appendix K tied to the state or federal state of emergency?
It is. Right now, our Appendix K is approved. The end date is up to 6 months after the federal public health emergency is declared over. So that gives us time to, once we know that it's going to be declared over, time to transition any individuals from services that they were receiving or flexibilities they were receiving through Appendix K.
Okay, and we've brought up workforce and the difficulties with that. We are hearing that CMS may mandate vaccines for all healthcare workers. How are you planning to address the significant workforce issues this will cause for waiver providers who anticipate that they will lose much of their workforce to non-healthcare jobs if a vaccine is required?
That is something that I really am not prepared to address today. It is much larger than me. It is something that I'm sure that we will discuss, especially as changes come out, and we hear that federally. But that is something that I think is larger than what I can give an answer to right now.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, sir. Senator Meredith.
Pam, again, appreciate your presentation today. And I know this redesign is a heavy lift for you. And this question is not meant to suggest that you folks aren't capable of doing this, but have you solicited outside help, expertise? And the reason I ask that is our last Medicaid Oversight Committee meeting, we had a great presentation from University of Louisville's Commonwealth Institute of Kentucky that I'm sure you're familiar with, that does research on various projects. Has there been any discussion about possibly reaching out to them to see what other states are doing, if there's a different way to do this, a better way to do this, a more cost-effective way to do this? And again, that's not a challenge to you folks. It's just, when we deal with it every day, sometimes we get blinded by what we're dealing with. And this looks like it could be an opportunity to, one, ease your workload, but secondly, bring some fresh thought to this whole entire process. Has there been any thought given to that?
Yes, sir. Actually, there has. And as part of our FMAP our proposal is that we will, whether it be through a university partnership or it be through procurement, that we will have some expertise onboarded to help us from, someone that, kind of has their pulse on even the federal changes and things that are going on, that are able to give us advice on what other states are doing, what they've seen that was successful versus what's not successful. And you're right, when you're in the day-to-day thick of it and down in the weeds, sometimes it's a little bit hard to, make sure you don't lose sight of bigger picture just because you're, down, even in the mud, honestly, working in it day to day. So I think it's going to be important to do that, and we are planning to do that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I also appreciate the passion that you bring to this. But one thing that impressed me about these folks in their presentation last week was their passion as well for doing things to improve Kentucky, and particularly with our healthcare delivery system. We've got a lot of opportunities, so I would strongly encourage you folks to have some very candid conversations with them and see what they're capable of doing. I think it could be a worthwhile relationship for everyone involved. So would appreciate if you consider that. But thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Meredith. Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Pam, thank you for your presentation. Just a quick question, and forgive me if you covered this in your presentation. I was a little late getting on today. When you're talking about equalizing the rates for the similar services, can you talk a little bit about when the service is the same, but there are obvious differences in the amount of time and effort that it takes to provide that service? And specifically, I'm looking more at case management services, HCB compared to maybe sports and community living case management. There is obviously more responsibilities, more time required with the SCL as opposed to HCB. Can you comment on that a little bit, please?
So there will have to be consideration given looking at the services, and if there is any that, even though they sound the same, there is inherent differences in it, either based on the expectations of what that service is, or the population, if in particular, if they require a large amount of coordination, there's a large amount of services. So I don't think we want to do anything blindly. So there will have to be consideration to look at that. And when just to speak to case management alone, we vary in rates from $100 a month in HCB all the way up to $434 a month in ABI. And so, I think while we can understand there are differences in the population, there's also a lot of similarities, and there's similarities in what we expect from the providers as well. So I think that has to be taken into consideration, that we don't want to do it just blindly.
And I think sometimes there's difficulty with those mainly on HCB and getting case management services simply because from a provider's point of view, it's if you take on a lot of those, there's not a lot of reimbursement on that. So as compared to the other two waivers that primarily dealt with in our types here at my facility. So that's obviously, I think, another consideration, but it's going to be a difficult balance. But I appreciate the effort you all are putting into this, and fairness and equality in this, I think, is something we've needed for a while. And I think it's going to go well, and I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you, Senator Carroll. Any other questions? Pam, thank you for your testimony, and we're going to hear back from you again, I think, a little bit later in our next issue, but we'll hear from you in a little bit. Okay, thank you, Pam. All right, this time we're going to discuss the HCBS waiver waiting list management. And we have Crystal Vardaman, Policy Director of Medicaid and CHIP Payment and Excess Commission, and Tamara Houston, who is the analyst for the same organization. So if we could, Crystal and Tamara, are you guys on?
Yes. Hi, good afternoon.
Good. Thank you. So if you could go ahead and proceed with your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start it off. I'm going to share our presentation. Bear with me one second. Okay, can everybody see that okay?
Yes, ma'am, we can. Thank you.
So good afternoon again. My name is Tamara Hewson. Thank you for inviting us to speak today. I'm joined by my colleague, Crystal Vardaman, and we're here today to share with you some of the findings of our work on state management of home and community-based service waiver waiting lists. This work was published in August 2020 on MACPAC's website as an issue brief and an accompanying compendium. Sorry, having a technical issue. My PowerPoint is stuck. So this is simply an overview of what we will be discussing today. I will just give a short introduction of MACPAC, and then we will dive into our content. So for those of you that may not be familiar with MACPAC, we are the Medicaid and CHIP Payment and Access Commission. MACPAC is a nonpartisan legislative branch agency located in DC that provides policy and data analysis and makes recommendations to Congress, the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the states on a wide array of issues affecting Medicaid and CHIP. We submit 2 reports to Congress each year in March and June, and this is where you can find the Commission's recommendations. For example, in a June 2020 chapter on integrating care for dually eligible beneficiaries, the Commission made a recommendation that Congress should provide additional federal funds to enhance state capacity to develop expertise in Medicare and to implement integrated care models with dually eligible beneficiaries. We also publish issue briefs and data reports throughout the year and provide technical assistance to Congress. The U.S. Comptroller General, a GAO, or the Government Accountability Office, which is another legislative agency, appoints MACPAC's 17 commissioners who come from all over the U.S. and bring broad expertise and a wide range of perspectives on Medicaid and CHIP. Commissioners include former state Medicaid directors, providers such as a primary care physician and a dentist, health plan executives, researchers, and advocates. In carrying out its work, the Commission holds public meetings and regularly consults with state officials, congressional and executive branch staff, beneficiaries, healthcare providers, researchers, and policy experts. As you're probably aware, waiver authorities allow states to forgo certain Medicaid requirements, such as comparability, freedom of choice, and statewide-ness. Section 1915C waivers are the primary waiver authority used by states to cover HCBS, and states typically offer multiple Section 1915C waivers in order to target a specific population or multiple populations. States are allowed to set caps on the number of people served under a Section 1915C waiver each year and must submit an amendment to CMS to raise or lower capacity. Slots may also be left open so that individuals with certain needs may be accommodated at any time. This is known as reserved capacity. Finally, states may establish waiting lists when demand exceeds the waiver's approved capacity. There are few federal requirements for how states manage waiting lists. CMS provides high-level guidance on waiting list management, but states retain a great deal of flexibility. Section 1915C waiver instructions say that if a waiting list is implemented, states must have policies in place to govern how individuals are selected for the waiver when a slot becomes available, and that these policies should be objective and applied consistently across the waiver service area. These instructions give examples of appropriate and inappropriate policies, and states can choose among the appropriate examples given or select alternative options. For example, entry to the waiver may be offered to individuals based on the date of their application for the waiver, or prioritized based on the imminent need for services that is determined through an assessment process. Kentucky policy varies by waiver. It's also important to note that eligibility screening for waiver services happens at different times in different states, making it difficult to measure unmet need and compare waiting lists across states. According to a Kaiser Family Foundation survey, 33 of 41 states with waiting lists screen individuals for waiver eligibility before placement on a waiting list. Some states use specific screening tools to determine waiver eligibility, taking into consideration factors such as financial eligibility and functional status. So last August, we published an issue brief and compendium with results of our work. A copy of the issue brief was included in the materials we provided in advance of our presentation today. The compendium is a large Excel workbook in which we analyze Section 1915C and Section 1115 waiver documents for all 50 states and DC. There are summary tabs for each of these waiver types, as well as individual state spreadsheets. In order to create this file, we searched Medicaid.gov for approved waivers and compiled selected information from these waivers, such as the maximum number of waiver participants allowed in year one of the waiver, criteria for entrance to the waiver, and reserved capacity categories, among other information. We then summarized by populations targeted and waiting list management practices. In addition to this analysis, we also conducted 16 stakeholder interviews, including interviews with federal officials, officials from 7 different states, state associations of directors of aging, physical disability, and developmental disability services, beneficiary advocacy organizations, and other experts. Themes from our interviews, as well as a summary of the findings from our compendium, are included in that issue brief. As part of our analysis of Section 1915C and Section 1115 waivers, we characterize waiting list management practices into 7 categories based on the criteria for waiver entry found in the waiver. And of the 254 approved Section 1915C waivers that we reviewed, 199 of them documented how waiting lists are managed, while 55 made no mention of a waiting list, so we cannot determine management practices for those waivers. We found that first come, first served is the most popular method. This is when an individual's placement on a waiting list is determined by how long they've been waiting, with the longest tenured individual at the top of the list receiving the next available waiver slot. Priority is another popular method. For these waivers, assessment and screening tools are often used to determine an individual's need for services, taking into account factors such as level of care requirements, natural supports available to them, or risks of institutionalization. Another group of waivers used a combination of priority and wait time, such as by assigning people to priority categories, but ordering them by wait time within those categories. Finally, many waivers specify that there will not be a waiting list. Our understanding is that Kentucky uses a mix of first come, first served and priority methods for managing their wait lists. And now I'll turn it over to Crystal to talk about the rationale for different practices, the experience of those on waiting lists, and strategies to reduce or eliminate waiting lists.
Thank you, Tamara. So in our interviews with states, we asked them why they chose the management practice that they use. And one state told us they use a first come, first served after encountering some litigation. And they actually considered it to be the fairest method of waiting list administration. Another state that had used first come, first served had moved there from a priority-based system. And they said this was helpful because they allocate their waiver slots by county, and moving to first come, first served had helped them to equalize that process. A third state used a priority-based approach, switching from first come, first served approach, so in the other direction. That state had a large waiting list when they were first come, first served, and they felt like it made more sense to serve people with the highest need first. In that case, the state also used a tiered waiver structure. Some states use tiered waivers where one HCBS waiver may have a more limited benefits package than another that serves the same population. So an individual may be waiting for the more intensive service package, but be receiving some services through another waiver. Next slide, please. We also heard that the decision that states make regarding their management approach plays into the wait times encountered by people seeking HCBS. So according to a survey by the Kaiser Family Foundation of 30 states with waiting lists, the average wait time was 39 months, so over 3 years. Similarly, the states that we interviewed that were able to give us estimates of their wait time had wait times that ranged from just under 300 days to 14 years. And in particular, first come, first served approaches can lead to long wait times. And so this relates to some of the comments Pam Smith just made. We heard from a number of stakeholders that where there's a first come, first served approach, families are incentivized to add their children to a wait list at a young age. These children could be receiving some services through their school or through the early periodic screening diagnostic and treatment benefit, or EPSDT, but parents know that as their child grows into adulthood, those services eventually won't be available. And so therefore they may put their children on the waiting list at a young age, anticipating that by the time they reach the top of the waiting list, they will be in need of those services as other services that will aged out of. Next slide, please. One theme that emerged from our work is that unmet need for HCBS is hard to measure because states don't track how individuals meet their care needs while waiting for waiver services. In our interviews, we asked stakeholders to discuss what happens to individuals while they wait, and they mentioned several options. First, stakeholders frequently cited support provided by family caregivers as a source of care. Given the key role of family caregivers for many people in need of HCBS, the loss of a caregiver can change a need for waiver services to urgent. And as Tamara mentioned earlier, states can reserve capacity in their waiver for certain reasons, and some states do reserve waiver capacity for people who lose a caregiver and then are in a crisis situation where their need for HCBS becomes suddenly more urgent. Individuals can also be receiving state plan services, and again, children can be receiving services through EPSDT, also through schools. And as I noted earlier, some states use tiered waivers, so someone can be waiting for a more intensive service package while receiving some services through a more limited waiver. Finally, many interviewees said it's possible that some individuals enter institutions in order to get care while they're waiting for a slot on it for a HCBS waiver. We couldn't quantify this, and some research shows that most people on waiting lists do remain living in the community, but it was a concern that was raised. Next slide, please. We also asked the states we talked to about some strategies they've used to reduce or eliminate waiting lists where they've been able to. And state funding was cited as the most important factor, speaking to your work here today. In some states, explicit support from the governor or the state legislature has led to funding increases that helped reduce waiting lists. We were also curious about whether states' movement toward managed long-term services and supports mattered, because we did see a lot of states move to MLTSS over the past decade. However, we heard mixed reviews on whether that movement to managed care had any effect on waiting lists. And finally, some stakeholders spoke about the potential of making HCBS a mandatory benefit, which would of course require federal statutory change. But one state official told us that, since HCBS are optional, they're always going to be more vulnerable to budget cuts than nursing facility services. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we learned that waiting lists are not comparable across states due to differences in the eligibility, screening, timing, the population served, and the services provided. Also, states that had waiting lists highlighted financial factors that limited their ability to reduce or eliminate waiting lists. We expect budget pressures post-COVID will continue to constrain states. And in addition, our interview suggested a growing need for HCBS. So we had several states cite growth both for older adults as well as for younger individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities. So this was a concern in terms of their capacity to serve them, given that current waiting list trends show that there's some constraints on serving existing demand. We also heard that states choose their method of waiting list administration considering a variety of factors, as I just discussed, which can affect wait time, and that tiered waivers were one way that states tried to manage their resources. This work raised a lot of questions for us and the Commission on how state efforts can be further encouraged and supported. And so the Commission's using this work to think about how the federal government can better support states in expanding and sustaining their rebalancing efforts. Next slide, please. And as Tamara mentioned, you can find the results of this work on our website, and we have some additional resources that may be helpful to your work. And with that, we'll conclude our presentation. Thank you again for inviting us to speak with you all today, and we're happy to take any questions.
Tamara and Crystal, thank you for your presentation. And do we have any questions? Senator Meredith?
Again, thank you for your presentation. I'd like to call your attention to your slide number 10. In your bullet point, individuals may enter institutions in some cases. And don't know if you heard the question I had for Ms. Smith earlier about the cost of doing nothing, but this is specifically what I'm talking about. If, because we can't address the wait list, can't get these folks within the waiver programs, and they are institutionalized, there is a tremendous cost associated with that. it would be wonderful to know what that cost is, because certainly that's a much more expensive proposition than doing our waiver programs. But that's why it helps us make decisions, is how we can reallocate resources. But again, Ms. Smith, that's the sort of thing I'm looking for to help us make these decisions. And I think that's something we need to study in probably great detail. Is, again, very straightforward. What's the cost of doing nothing to society? You know, same with, and it's a little bit softer probably, but with family members providing these services in the home, that probably means that they're not able to be in the workforce, and there's a cost associated with that as well. So I know this is a big elephant to try to digest, but I think we need to have a better understanding of what the costs are by not addressing the issues of the waiver program. So I guess that's not a question as much as an editorial comment, Mr. Chair. But again, those are the things I'd like to see if we could give some focus to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Meredith. Any other questions online or in person? Again, Crystal and Tamara, thank you for your presentation. We appreciate it so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
And at this time, we'll bring back Pam Smith to give a presentation on the same topic. So, Pam, are you with us?
I am here. Let me bring up this presentation. If you all just let me know when you're able to see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Now, if I could just work my computer, sorry. So this is just a reiteration of the slide that we talked about in the other presentation. Currently, out of our 6 waivers right now, we do have wait list in Michelle P. and SCL. I think this is a slide too we've talked about quite a bit, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that slide. So currently, how do we manage the wait list? So in the previous presentation, and you ladies were correct, we do have two different methods for Michelle P. and SCL right now. Michelle P. is a first come, first served basis. When that waiting list was created, that was how it was developed. The SCL waiting list actually is done on a priority basis, so based on the category that you're in, and then based on emergencies can be requested at any time, and then the other 2 wait lists, urgent and future planning, they remain in chronological order of when they were placed on that wait list. So again, for Michelle P., the individual applies for Michelle P. services via the Medicaid waiver management application. And I want to talk a little bit about that application process. So it's a no wrong door process. So when the individual comes in and completes the waiver application, they're not specifically saying, I want SCL, I want Michelle P., I want ABI. They complete a comprehensive application, and then it is evaluated for all waivers that they may or may not be able to benefit from, or where they would meet the target criteria. So once that application is screened and it is determined that the individual meets, in this case, the target criteria for the Michelle P. waiver, they're placed on the wait list based on the date the completed application is received. Now, at this point in time, if once they're placed on the wait list, if they meet target criteria for any of the other waivers, then they can be referred on to that waiver. So in many cases, they will get referred on to HCB and may begin receiving services in HCB while they're still waiting on the Michelle P. wait list. So the wait list is again determined on a first come, first served basis. Once the slot opens for the individual, so in the cases we've talked about, Michelle P., they've been on for 6 years. At the point in time that their slot gets allocated, then a level of care assessment will be done for them. And we have found that a lot of times individuals on the wait list either do not qualify for services or they just do not respond. Cases where they do not qualify, there is the whole due process of they can request a hearing. And so at some point in time, those slots, when they're allocated, can be held up for 90 to 180 days just waiting for that process to go through. Individuals can receive waivers in another waiver or can receive state plan while they're on the wait list. Individuals can decline a slot. However, for Michelle P., they move to the end of the wait list if they decline that slot. They can remove themselves from the wait list at any time. And annually, we send a letter out that verifies that all of their information is the same, that they do want to remain on the waiting list. And they send that in, and our staff, we receive a large portion of those back in return to mail, but we have staff that work very diligently to reach out and try to find the individuals and verify their information at least annually. So for SCL, again, it's the same application process. So they come in through the system, they fill out that application, it's evaluated against all the target criteria for the waivers. Then the individual is placed in the correct category on the wait list based on the date the completed application is received. So in the case that someone meets emergency criteria from the very beginning, then they will be allocated a slot. We do reserve slots right now. We have, I lost my note piece of paper. I believe we have 80 slots right now that we have open in SCL that are reserved for those emergency situations. And at any time, anybody on the urgent wait list or the future planning category of the wait list can say my situation has changed and I would like to apply for emergency status. Same thing here. If they get added to the wait list, it doesn't stop there. If they potentially can be served by another waiver, their application will be forwarded on to that other waiver. Same thing, their LOC assessment, their CIS, which is their needs assessment, is completed once the slot opens for them. They can receive services in the other waiver state plan while on the wait list. Individuals can decline a slot when offered. They can remove themselves from the wait list at any time, and it does not prevent them from reapplying at a later date. And again, similar process, there's letters that go out annually. For SCL, it goes out in the month of their birth that just validates information and validates that they want to remain on the waiting list or if they have information that needs to change. The one thing that's happened most recently with SCL is the regulation 907 KAR 7020 was formalized, which gives individuals appeal rights if it is determined when they apply for an emergency status, if it is determined that they do not meet that or they're denied emergency status, that gives them appeal rights for that decision. The categories, just to elaborate on those a little bit for SCL. So emergency means I need services right now. I have an immediate need. So there's been some sort of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, and it's been substantiated by DCBS. There is a death of the primary caregiver, and there's no alternative caregiver. Lack of appropriate placement due to they've lost housing, lost funding, or imminent discharge from temporary placement. We have jeopardy to the individual's health and safety due to the primary caregiver's physical or mental health status. So, for example, you may have an elderly parent that is taking care of an individual and they just physically are not able to safely do that to protect themselves or the individual. And then we have imminent or current institutionalization. So these are individuals that desire, that may be in an institution, but want to transition back out into the community. Urgent. So this is, we do not need services right now, but we need services potentially within a year. So there's threatened loss of existing funding, temporary inappropriate placement, but health and safety is assured, but we realize that situation is not going to be long-term. They have a primary caregiver with diminished capacity due to physical or mental status and no alternative caregiver. Or they exhibit an intermittent behavior or action that requires hospitalization or police intervention. In future planning, this is where we see a lot of the younger individuals. A lot of times we have parents that go ahead and add their children to the SCL future planning wait list because they know at some point in time they are going to need services. But in this category also, it's individual, they're not currently receiving service through funding source and their needs are being met. They're not receiving services and they do not currently need services, or they are in the custody of DCBS, and so DCBS is taking care of their services at this time. So to change and simplify wait lists going forward, the changes we would like to put into place, and this would be across the board, the policy for any waiver, whether they have a wait list right now or they could potentially have one in the future, is that there would be two categories. There would be essentially an emergency category and a non-emergency category. If the individual did not meet the emergency criteria, they would be placed on the non-emergency list. If they were denied that emergency status, they could appeal that decision. Individuals at any time on that non-emergency list can apply for emergency status if it changes, and the percentage of slots in each waiver would be reserved for those emergency situations. There's been a lot of questions about the unduplicated slots and the wait list. So we've talked about, for example, Michelle P. has 10,500 slots. And there's been questions asked, if someone leaves the waiver, say their waiver year begins on September 1st. So once an individual uses at least one service in that waiver, that slot remains theirs. So I've been asked the question, well, if someone, unfortunately passes away or someone moves out of state, why can't we just go ahead and reallocate that slot? So, and I had a lengthy discussion with CMS about this. And so their definition is of an unduplicated participant is a unique individual who participates in the waiver during a waiver year, regardless of when the individual entered the waiver and the length of stay on the waiver. A person who enters, exits, and re-enters the waiver during a waiver year counts as one unduplicated waiver participant. We base our cost neutrality determinations and calculations that we send to CMS based on a number of unduplicated participants. So if you think about the participant as the owner of the slot, if they leave for any reason, they still own that slot until the waiver year is over. If at the end of the waiver year going into the next waiver year, they're still receiving services, then obviously that slot will remain that individual slot. But at the end of each waiver year, and Michelle P. actually is coming to a close in 8 days. So on the 31st, Michelle P.'s waiver year ends. We will reevaluate. Right now, we have 253 slots that are in a vacated status, which means it's an individual that had received services at some point in time between September 1st and today. If they are not accessing services on September 1st, those slots will become available. And we actually are already planning to allocate 300 slots on September 15th. We'll take about a 2-week period to look at the numbers and make sure all of the ones that we can take back that were vacated, in addition to the 135 that we have available, as well as right now, we just on July 1st, we allocated, I believe it was about 175 slots. We actually still have 121 of those that individuals haven't responded to, and they have 60 days to respond to that allocation. So there's also potentially a portion of those slots that will give us more slots to be allocated. This one we talked about in the previous slide, that, what can we do to eliminate the wait list? And Senator Meredith, I've heard the comment and have taken that to point, and actually jotted down already one of the reports that I want to run is what is the cost of doing nothing. So I want to look at what our cost is of the individuals that are on the wait list, and I also want to look at what our institutional rate is of individuals that have been on the wait list to see what we're seeing there as far as their access of other services, or what in particular if they've been forced to go into a nursing facility or an ICFID facility. And this one you all heard before, it's kind of the same thing. Change is hard. We expect that regardless of what changes that we make, there'll be someone that may have a question about it. And then just again, that the reminder, just the holistic consideration of all of the waivers and the individuals that we serve.
Thank you, Pam. Any questions from anybody in the room or online? Doesn't appear that there are any. Pam, thank you for giving both presentations today, and we appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Hold on. Pam, are you still there? Pam, do we look? Yeah, I'm sorry. Senator Carroll, I think is, do you need a question, Senator Carroll?
I do, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. All the letters didn't get typed in. Pam, thank you for the presentation. Something came to mind in talking about the assessments that are done when an individual applies for the waiver. Can you talk a little bit about how standardized that assessment is across the state? And if we're assessing for all waivers, is that going to change in the future? And I've heard you mention something in the past about maybe some type of standardized assessment, validated assessment. Can you explain that a little bit?
I can. So let me do it in two steps. So one, when an individual is put on the wait list, so there is a basic set of target criteria, which basically looks at for SCL and Michelle P, it's looking at, do I have a diagnosis that is documented by testing or by, there's a various list of documents that can be provided, adaptive testing, IQ testing. Do I have a diagnosis that validates that I could be served on this waiver? So all of them, each waiver has their own set of target criteria or basic criteria they have to meet to even be placed on the waiting list. And then once the slots are allocated in the assessment, so answer to your question today, we have a variety of assessments for all of the waivers. The only one right now, SCL uses a support intensity scale or assist assessment, and that is a validated tool. The other waivers right now are using a mix of a MAP 351 and a K-HAT, which are all the MAP 351 is homegrown. It was developed by the state. It's been around for many, many years. The K-HAT was adopted from a tool that was in Wisconsin. Those tools are not validated. That is something we want to move towards, is a validated assessment that captures all of the needs of the various populations that we serve. So we want to make sure that we're capturing the needs of children, that we're capturing the differences in children and adults, that we're capturing the needs of individuals with brain injuries. But that is one of the plans with the RFMAP enhanced funding. That was one of the tasks that we have listed in there to do the study on and to adopt a validated assessment tool.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Carroll. Senator Meredith?
Thanks, sir. Just a quick question, Pam, and I think I've heard this number before, but I just want to make sure. You mentioned twice that additional money is needed, so if you mentioned it twice, it must be important, and it certainly is. I know that it is, but do you know at this point in time what the ask is going to be? It seems like I heard the number 45 million, 47 million.
It is between, and I thought I still had that up, but I put it down. It is between like 35 and 40, and I'm going by memory, and I know that's a large gap, but it has been evaluated, and we can share that information, and that is to get everybody up to a certain, that would be kind of that break even or that point. As far as what the amount would be that needs to help eliminate the wait list, that it's difficult to tell because all of the individuals, they may need one service, they may need 5 services. So it's not an easy number to come to, but I will take that back, and I can look at what state plan services the individuals are getting, and then again look at kind of what our average waiver participant to get a better number for you all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Meredith. And again, Pam, thank you for both presentations.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll go to our last topic, community integration and meeting the needs of vulnerable Kentuckians. And our guest will be Jeff Edwards, who is the Division Director of Protection and Advocacy Division, the Department of Public Advocacy. So, Jeff, are you with us?
I am.
Thank you, Jeff, and go ahead and give your presentation.
Well,
it's on the screen.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And sometimes it's on the screen here and it's not. So I want to thank the committee today for this opportunity to speak with you. I am the director of the Kentucky Protection and Advocacy System. Congress created the P&A system in the 70s. We have approximately 20 people that are working here and serving all Kentuckians with disabilities in 120 counties. We are also a client-directed agency. So the information that I'm sharing with you today is from not only our advisory bodies, but also Kentuckians with disabilities and their families. Our federal authority allows us to pursue legal, administrative, and other remedies. Some of those that have included the Michelle P. settlement created the Michelle P. waiver and also crisis services, and also the interim settlement agreement and amended settlement agreement, and the second amended settlement agreement that allows people with mental illness living in personal care homes or in other settings that would like to live more independently in the community. Also, our investigation into Oakwood in the early 2000s led to the Department of Justice investigation and the consent decree, which increased the number of people receiving services in the community and also better transition. And how we also, part of the Michelle P. waiver and also working with the Department of Justice's Oakwood, the Olmstead decision was paramount in that. And Olmstead was a decision in 1999 that required people it was for two women in the state of Georgia that were living in an institutional setting and wanted services in the community. And part of the decision that came down said the institutional placement of persons who can handle and benefit from community setting perpetuates unwarranted assumptions that persons so isolated are incapable of or unworthy of participating in community life. Our clients want to live and work and receive services in the community like everyone else. That has been made clear to us many, many times, and also has been said earlier today. So to reiterate a little bit, the 1915 C waivers in Olmstead, we have 6 waivers. The brain injury, long-term, home community-based, the Model 2 ventilator, and of course, SCL Michelle P. Michelle P. was, like I said earlier, a result of our lawsuit. All plaintiffs were individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities. The Supports Community Living waiver has a residential component, and of course, the Michelle P. does not. Now, there have been several things that Medicaid has taken on and addressed over the recent past, and we applaud them. The 300% patient liability standard that allowed recipients to keep more of their income and by remaining in the community. Prior to the change, some Social Security beneficiaries on waivers paid hundreds of dollars a month out of pocket for received services. Recipients had to choose between losing waiver services altogether or paying the liability. Several individuals with disability testified at a legislative hearing, which led to an immediate pledge to change the policy. That change became effective January 1st of 2020. We have to listen to consumers. Services in a hospital setting, Appendix K. Okay, I've lost everything.
Jeff, if you could hang on for a second, we're going to bring your presentation up on the screen here. We don't see anything right now, so they're going to work on that. I apologize. It'll just take just a second.
Sure.
And Jeff, when we get to that ready, if you could just tell us when you want to advance to the next, okay?
Okay.
Okay. And we're going to start on the one that has the recent positive changes to the waivers applauding DMS, okay?
Sure. I think that's number 6.
I believe you're right. Okay, we've got it up, Jeff.
Right.
Go ahead.
Thank you. In Appendix K allows during the public health emergency, we had asked on 2 occasions that people be allowed to receive services in the hospital setting. That was denied, but finally, it was late February, early March this year, it was agreed to. And now with the CARES Act, that can be made permanent. And Pam earlier talked about Arthur Campbell, who is also a member of one of our advisory boards. And one of the things that Arthur dealt with, he had a hospital stay during COVID. He did not have staff with him in the hospital. Arthur's speech is difficult to understand. So it was a struggle for Arthur to make sure that he was receiving good, appropriate services. And with this change, that will be possible. And also for PDS, legally responsible individuals and legal guardian issues. Previously, waiver recipients could not hire a relative to provide PDS services because they were classified as natural supports. That is no longer the case. And the onboarding costs, hopefully we will get CMS approval for the onboarding costs associated with people hiring staff under participant directed services, not paying those costs. That is a burden to people and their families wanting to participate. It's also easy for people not to hire additional staff or new staff and put themselves in situations where they may not be receiving the best possible services that they need and deserve, but they are willing to forego that because the cost that's associated with it. And that can be astronomical for people, especially people that we're talking about that are utilizing waiver services. Next slide, please. And the problems that persist. The pay rate of $11.52 an hour. HCB attendant care is $24 an hour. People hiring for $11.52 and you all have heard this already today. We can sit at any McDonald's drive-through and see people paying $12, $14, $16 an hour at this point in time. Pam's example from Arthur Campbell also about how we do pay people more to pick up garbage. We need to increase that pay. That will increase the number of direct support professionals. Lack of services in certain waivers. Habilitative versus rehabilitative services. Many waivers previously had PT and OT services. You can't get enough habilitative, such as PT or OT services in the state plan. That allows people to maintain a level of function and maintain as much independence as possible. If we are only concentrating on rehabilitative services, we are not allowing people to live to their fullest potential. And also transportation. We need more than non-emergency medical transportation. People want to go to the community. They need to go to the community. Shopping, food, entertainment. That is also dollars that we're putting back into small communities. And then also provider issues for recipients. CHFS previously offered provider support and guidance. Now providers see CHFS as a recoupment tool. Providers can't risk their program if they take on people with challenging behaviors. We need to support them in serving people who need the services the most and not put providers in a situation where they are not willing to open their doors to people because they feel that they will not be getting support from CHFS, but they will be losing funds. And also the shrinking provider pool, that's going to lead to more institutionalization and put the health, safety, and welfare of people at risk. Next slide, please. So with what we've heard today, is Kentucky in violation of the Olmstead decision? Olmstead says the waiting list must move at a reasonable pace. The last two enacted budgets did not include new waiver slots. We have approximately 10,000 people that are waiting. I know Medicaid, and Pam said it, there are probably people that qualify for other services or another waiver, or maybe receiving services through EPSDT for children, something that a school might be doing, or the state health plan. But nevertheless, I'm sure there are people that need services and supports, or their families know that they are going to need services and supports, but a waiting list of 10,000 people, in excess for some people, if I understood right, over 20 years, that is a hindrance. That's a reason to discourage people for applying for services. Next slide, please. So, money is always the answer, isn't it? Waiver redesign is not impacting people sitting on the waiting list. We need people to receive, we need money to increase the number of people living in the community. Address the waiver problems that still persist. The PDS pay rate, lack of direct service professionals, lack of services in the waivers, redesign of exceptional supports and provider support. And it's also time that we take a look at a serious mental illness waiver for people that are able to and would like to live in the community that have an SMI diagnosis. They, like the people that we've been talking about with intellectual and developmental disabilities, want to live and work and use their community like everyone else. Next slide, please. So, next steps, I would encourage the task force to invite as many people with disabilities as possible, people that are utilizing these waiver services. Let's hear from them about the pay rate, the lack of DSPs, the lack of nursing services in some waivers, the need for residential supports in HCB, habilitative therapies, transportation, exceptional supports, and supporting providers. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
No, we would be happy to arrange for people to meet with the task force, to tell you about their personal experiences, not only from our advisory serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but also our advisory board serving, made up of and serving people with mental illness. I would like to thank the task force for your time today and answer any questions.
Thank you, Jeff, and we appreciate that last suggestion. Senator Adams and I have made sure that we've had somebody with disabilities that has been the first speaker at every meeting so far. So I appreciate you thinking of that, and we've tried to do that so far in these meetings. Anybody have any questions? Jeff, thank you so much for your presentation. We appreciate what you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that will be the end of this meeting. The next meeting of the task force is Monday, September 20th at 1 p.m. And at this time, we will adjourn. Thank you, everybody.